Hey BookTube, I'm back for part 2 of my used book haul. This is the nonfiction video, so if you're only interested in nonfiction, then this is the video to watch. If you're only interested in classics, then the first video would be the one to watch. Or if you're just purely interested in fiction, then I would say, or more contemporary fiction, then I would say the third video would be the one to watch. Um, but I'm going to get right into this because I don't want this video to be 35 minutes or 38 minutes, whatever the last one was. I really need to be more quick with my hauls. So this one has probably half the amount of books as the classics one video had. So we're going to start off with a 2-volume little set here. This is from the Pelican History of England, volumes 3 and 8. The volume 3 is English Society in the Early Middle Ages, 1066 to 1307, by Doris Mary Stenton. And it's just very short. And then volume 8 is the England in the 19th century, 1815 to 1914, by David Thompson. And I believe I have a work of this already that I found used just recently, actually. I believe it's volume, just looking at the back here, they have a whole list. There's 8 volumes so far, at least in this print in here. I think I have volume 7, England in the 18th century, by J.H. Plum. I think I have that volume, but I could be mistaken. The interesting thing is actually the Middle Ages volume 3, has a picture of our author at the back there. This is Doris Mary Stenton. This one does not have that. But yeah, just 2 volumes in the Pelican History of England. I've never even heard of these except for when I find them used, and some old English history, or old at least in my sense. Yeah, these were published in 1950, and yeah, in the 1950s. So then we move on to a book I've never heard of, but I'm very glad that I found, because this would have been perfect, like the type of book that I would have added onto an Amazon wish list if I knew that it existed. This is The Declaration of Independence, A Global History. This is by David Armitage. And this is not the size of a usual book. I'll pick up this one here. This is a small little, this is a normal mass market size. When I size it up here, this one is smaller, but it's also fatter on the edges there. So it's got like this weird boxy format. And then you see that's the world. And you can see all the books here that I have stacked up on there, but because it's like it's mirroring it. Anyways, it says it's a global history, and so that makes it very short. It's only about 145 pages, which seems to me like, how can you be so comprehensive as to call this a global history of the Declaration of Independence? But the kick is that this book includes another 100 pages, right? 45, no, more like 130 pages of publishing extras here, where after the conclusion, it includes the text of the Declaration of Independence, that it includes all kinds of documents. So it's got the original rough draft by Thomas Jefferson. It's got some kind of in Congress. It says, in Congress, July 4th, 1776, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled. So it's some kind of transcription of, I guess, of that meeting. Then we got a short review of the Declaration by Jeremy Bentham, a manifesto of the province of Flanders, extracts from 1790, the Haitian, or like from Haiti, the Caribbean island. It's got their Declaration of Independence from 1804, the Venezuelan Declaration of Independence from 1811, the New Zealand one from 1835, the Declaration of Independence from the by the delegates of the people of Texas from 1836, the Declaration of Independence from the representatives of the people of the Commonwealth of Liberia from 1847. That is quite the mouthful. And then we got the Czechoslovak nation from 1918. And then we have the Vietnam one from 1845, the State of Israel from 1948, and then the Unilateral Declaration of Independence from Southern Rhodesia from 1965. Just all of that in as extras in this volume, which I just find fascinating because it's part analysis, but also part part study, but also part anthology. So I find that just totally up in my alley. Even though I'm not usually into American history so much, this kind of global history, so the influence of the Declaration of Independence on Declaration of Independences that came after it, that to me is a fascinating subject. Then we get a collection of essays called Conscientious Objections by Neil Postman. And then the wordy subtitle is Stirring Up Trouble About Language, Technology, and Education. Neil Postman is a thinker that does quite interest me. I read about half of his Technopoly book for a course of mine that I had to take on technology and education. I read it on my own, though we did talk about Neil Postman, just his ideas in general, and I find him quite fascinating. Especially like his book Technopoly, I think, is a book that should be read a lot more widely. Even though his most famous book is Amusing Ourselves to Death, and it's a book, basically a little screed against TV and the influence of TV. I do have that book as an ebook. I have not read it yet, but it strikes me as a little bit more of like Old Man Yells at Cloud, but Technopoly just seems like has a more thoughtful analysis on the state of technology and how that shifts and changes society, whether for good or for bad. And so this is a collection of essays basically along those lines, of his lines of thought. Yeah, it's short. It's got a number of his essays, and I haven't read any of his short work, but he does have some talks online. I do recommend them. I mean, he's got a terrible voice because he was a smoker, and so you can tell that his voice is just totally destroyed by his habit there. But anyways, then we move on to an author that never used to interest me, but if I find his books, I'm going to pick them up now. At least, I don't know. It depends. This is The Economic Facts and Fallacies by Thomas Sowell. He's more of like a conservative thinker in a small c sense. He's an economist. He's probably one of the most popular economists, at least of his time. He's still alive around and has recently published a book today, like in these days, but he's in like his 90s or something, and but he's been a huge popular thinker on the topics of economics. This book was published in 2007, and then the second edition was published in 2011. But I've never been totally interested in this author, mostly maybe because it's when David Murphy had a channel, he would talk about this author, and he would have his quibbles with this author as presenting only like his own side of things and not really such a nuanced thinker in the sense of like he's presenting books as like general economics books, but really he was proposing and pushing forward a certain theory of economics, and not considering others. I don't know, for some reason that really put me off. But I found this book for very cheap, so I'm gonna give the author a try. Now we move on to a hardcover little study. It's Marshall McLuhan by Douglas Copeland. Marshall McLuhan was a famous Canadian thinker, one of the most famous Canadian thinkers. He's basically along the same line as Neil Postman about the idea of technology in society, but he was one of the major originators of that kind of thinking of technology. And if you've heard of the term "the medium is the message," that comes from this author, and he wrote a number of books himself. But the thing is, he was a terrible prose writer, and so he's very difficult apparently to get through. So getting a little biographical sketch of the man and his ideas, this neat little hardcover, I think is the way to go. At least to begin with. I would like to try and read some of his more famous works. I think he wrote quite a bit, though. But the idea of the medium of the message, from my understanding, is that like the very idea of TV, or the very idea of technology, certain technology, so like the very idea of the cell phone, though of course he never lived long enough to see the cell phone, or the very idea of, say, like the car, and what it does, has its own message ingrained into the way that the technology works. So, TV is passive entertainment, and the way we're pulled to TV, or say now to our phones, there's something implicit in the way we consume media through that message that is a message in its own self. Something that is so ingrained that we don't think about it. We only think of the effects of what we're watching, but we don't think of the medium through which we're watching it. So think of the role of the idea of disinformation and whatnot that has been going around all the way since the advent of social media. That never would have been the case if we never had the capacity to hold a cell phone in our hands that has access to all the information in the world and through all the social media in the world. And just as an example, that's my understanding of the idea of the medium is the message. And he had a lot of, I guess he's considered more like a technological prophet, because I don't know how long he lived. He came out in the 1960s with these ideas, but I don't know when he ended up dying. But I know that he didn't live long enough to see the internet. Unlike Neil Postman, who did, though Neil Postman also didn't live long enough to see the advent of cell phones and social media. So, anyways, that's that book. Next we come to another fairly controversial, very bestseller, nonfiction. This is Christopher Lash's The Culture of Narcissism. This is American Life in an Age of Diminishing Expectations. I've been aware of Christopher Lash's books, though of course this book is too sensationalistic for me to take it totally seriously. I believe this was published in early 80s, late 70s, 1979. But some of his other books do interest me more. Since he published this book, he published The True and Only Heaven: Progress and Its Critics. That's a book that I would like to get. And then he has The Revolt of the Elites and the Betrayal of Democracy from 1994. So that one also does interest me as well. But this was his major bestseller of the time, basically calling culture, calling out narcissism in our modern culture. And it says what was happening to American society in the wake of the decline of the family over the last century. The book, so it's like individualism, but gone wrong, I guess, or gone awry. That's my understanding of the book, anyways. Then we move on to some very different books. For example, this book here is The Cambridge Companion to Shakespeare Studies. So it's basically a book of essays on Shakespeare and Shakespeare's thought and Shakespeare's plays by different scholars in the field. This edition was published in 1986. I don't know if it was updated by then, but it's Stanley Wells is the editor. And I like to pick up these books when I can, these Cambridge Companion volumes, because at least when they're very cheap like this, because they're usually quite expensive online. but if you want to study a author or a subject matter in more depth than, say, the Wikipedia entry or whatever, then this is the way to go. Though, of course, it's a bunch of academics writing articles here, so you have to take some of them with a grain of salt, in the sense that, and also not all of them are going to be, or most of them probably won't be very clear to read or very interesting to read in the sense of their prose style, but you have to be interested in the subject matter for these to actually be worthwhile for you to check out. And I mean, I don't see why I can't just pick through this when I'm reading Shakespeare or something like that, so that's why I picked this one up. Then there's another book that, if I'd known had existed, I would have added this onto a wish list of some sort, but I had never known such a book existed. This is American Manhood. This is Transformations in Masculinity from the Revolution to the Modern Era, and the author is E. Anthony Rotundo, and it's basically a study of the history of manhood in America, which to me is very fascinating. I do have some ebooks of books that try to study different ideals of masculinity, like what's one of them, like the king, the hunter, like these archetypal like visions of masculinity, the king, the hunter. There's a few more there that I'm missing. Maybe the priest, I think, is another one. But yeah, and there's other books that talk about like the coming of age ceremonies that many cultures have, not just for men, but for men and women, but they're very distinct. Like coming of age, like ceremonies, and how important that is for men to know that they've made that transition from men to boys, because with this idea of manhood, it's usually something that you have to work your way toward, and not something that you just kind of evolve into. I mean, or maybe it's like a tension between evolving into manhood and proving that you earn your right to be a man, that kind of thing. And that really does interest me in this way. And this book proposes to be a study of that. I think this came out in the 90s. Let's see here. Published in 1993, so yes, I'm correct. And yeah, he just goes through all these different, the shifting of the identity of the American man, because of course in the 20th century alone you have shifting of what it means to be a man, because at the early 20th century, like before World War I, the man was like the master of the household, the one who did all the work while the woman stayed at home. I mean, even then, the ideas of the roles of women were changing at the time as well, like the new woman movement and the blossoming of the feminist movements, of the early feminist movements. But when he came into World War I, when men had to all go off and fight, and then the women that were staying behind were the ones basically taking over the position that males had during the war. So they were the ones in production and going to work and whatnot. And then after the war, you can't undo that. Women were in position in society where like they can work for themselves all of a sudden, like, and they wanted to work for themselves. They wanted to have their own living, own their own paycheck, and not just be at home all the time. So, what does that do from a man's perspective, and the shifting of the man, so he's like the breadwinner and the sole breadwinner, to having to deal with the changing, and for the better, the shifting of the role of the woman in the household and in society, and how that means you have to change your idea of masculinity into a more evolving concept. And I think that's part of the chapters in here, part of the chapter in here, is the development of men's attitudes towards women. That's a chapter in here. Work and identity, because for men, a lot of their identity is in the work that they do. The male culture of the workplace, and just passionate manhood, a changing standard of masculinity. And I don't know if this guy goes into, how far this guy goes into his study, but still, it's a fascinating subject, and I'm very glad to find this book. We've got 3 more books left, BookTube, so stick with me here. Here is a biography. I don't usually pick up biographies, but in the Martian McLuhan book, notwithstanding, because it's like 115 pages, and it's more of a study of the just as much a study of the ideas of the author than an actual comprehensive biography. While this one is a thick book that that calls itself a biography. This is Katherine the Great by Robert K. Massey. This is Portrait of a Woman, and it's got one of these fold-out covers here with all the blurbs there. But the reason I picked this one up, and this one was kind of fascinating, is because I was going through Shelley Swearengen's videos when on BookTube. I was going through a lot of her older videos on like her best of videos, her favorites and least favorites of different reading years, and I believe one of her one of the years that was it? I forget which year it was, but she anyways held this book up as one of her favorite reads of the entire year, because Robert Massey was such a great writer, and she loved the personal details and the way he managed to make this book thrilling to read, which is not something you usually associate with history or biography. And she's usually mostly a novelist reader, but she does read some nonfiction. But reading a biography, this one not only thrilled her, but also made her want to read more biography. And I remember I was going through the biography section of one of the thrift stores that I was at, and I was like, "Oh, I would love to get a copy of Katherine the Great," because I mean, this one is the author himself is extremely popular. Was extremely popular. So this would have a huge printing, I was sure. And right as I said that, like my eye settled on the spine of this, and I was like, "Oh, there it is!" And I picked it up, and it's like in a perfectly good copy. I got it for very cheap, and I'm very glad to have it. I do have his Dreadnought, like the big 1,000 volume about World War II, or World War I, excuse me. And I'm looking forward to that one too, because I've heard lots of great things about the author and his prose style. This other volume is also one of the finds of the day, or at least for nonfiction, though I'm kind of going between like the best finds, whether like the American Manhood book or this other book here, which is right off camera, but this one would be a runners-up. It's The Golden Bough by James G. Fraser. This is The Roots of Religion and Folklore. And if you're not familiar with this author, this book came out, I think, late 19th century. I believe in like 1890s or something. Would it actually? Yeah, 1890 actually. 1890. This came out in 2 volumes, and it's basically one of the first works of a sociological look at religion, or at least an anthropological / sociological look at religion in human society, which is where you get the subtitle from, The Roots of Religion and Folklore. And there is a an Oxford World Classic of this volume, or of this book, but it's in an abridged form, and does not include the illustrations, which this one does. This is a big hardcover, which is the entire work, which was in 2 volumes, and this one says with 100 illustrations. And I've never heard of. I thought this book was a lot longer than this, so I was skeptical, but this one promises me that it's not abridged, and it's just this big fat work. And the thing is, it's got a ton of illustrations in there, as it promises. We got that one, and they're full page illustrations too. They're not just tossed off, which to me I think is the only way you could possibly want to read a book like this. And this book is, well, in terms of its scholarship, it's essential in that it was an early book in like anthropological studies of humans and religion, but Also, the author was considered to be a very good prose writer, which is why it's considered a classic today, even though, from my understanding, scholarship has long since passed this by. Like, this is very archaic in its scholarship. It's still a classic book, and it was like a bombshell at the time, in the terms of its influence. So, getting a nice big hardcover full of illustrations, to me this was a huge find. Though it's not as huge as this next book here, which I want to say it's the find of the nonfiction section. Like, it's the find of all the nonfiction books that I found. Even though I say that the American Manhood book is very, very close to being there as well. But it's an enormous book on the history of Europe. It's called Europe, A History by Norman Davies, and it is 1,000 pages, or like 11,000 pages, or not 11,000, 1,100 pages, I think. Actually, no, when you include even the index, it's 1,300 pages. But it's got a ton of notes and tables and all that fun stuff at the very back. A very, very serious work. And yeah, maps. Let's see there. That's better. Yeah, it's got just pages of maps and pages of tables. The actual book itself is 1,136 pages. So all of this is extra material, including the index and notes. And does it have a bibliography? Not really. But this, to me, I've heard of this book before, but I didn't really, there's books that have been written like this before. I didn't realize just how big it was, though. And just getting this, this was very cheap. I think I paid, actually, the price is right there. I paid $1.50 for this enormous work. And I'm very glad to have it. I hope it's not dry, because I guess this would be a subject matter which could be very dry. But just the sheer, my sheer interest in the subject. I do have some European histories that already, but I've not read any of them yet. But just having this one I'm sure that will be enough momentum to carry me through all these pages. Yeah, and it's what a find for $1.50. So that is my nonfiction section. I hope you enjoyed it. I sure enjoyed buying them. But yeah, that's my nonfiction book. I'm glad that we finished just under 30 minutes, and I'll see you in my part 3 video.